Jeremy Richard Strensham Hunt. He's our current Chancellor of the Exchequer and former Secretary of State for Health. He's an Oxford-educated, successful businessman, but don't let that detract from the fact that he's also a complete arsewipe. He's about as charming and likeable as an infected hemorrhoid, and when God chose to include teeth in his mouth, he ruined an otherwise perfectly serviceable arsehole. Jeremy meets all of the criteria for being a frontbench Conservative in 2023. Born into wealth? Check. Privately educated? Check. Graduated from Oxford? Check. A long history of saying that you don't want poor people to suffer while consistently affecting their cost of living, healthcare opportunities, and housing, all the while catering specifically to ultra-rich corporate business owners and those with generational wealth at the detriment of the very poorest amongst us that he claims to want to champion? That's a big fat checkaroony. Today we're going to run through a short history of Jeremy Hunt's achievements, I suppose. Despite my extremely biased and aggressive introduction, we will be objective and truthful and honest, and while I promise I will do my best not to call him too many nasty names, I'm not Jesus Christ. I've come to accept that now. Jez was born in 1966, making him old as fuck. He was born the son of Sir Nicholas Hunt, an admiral in the Navy. Judging by this, you can assume he's wealthy, but reducing Jeremy's origins to just a bit well off doesn't really do it any justice. His family is firmly rooted in aristocracy. Jeremy himself is the 29th great-grandson of King Henry I, which, weirdly enough, is the only thing he has in common with Danny Dyer. He's the great-great-grandson of the colonial administrator Strensham Master, and he's a distant cousin of both Queen Elizabeth II and disgraced founder of the British Union of Fascists, Oswald Mosley. The point is, saying his family is simply wealthy is a bit like saying Genghis Khan was just a bit of an overbearing tourist. Growing up, he attended and later became head boy of Charter House, a private boarding school that's probably reasonably priced, and Jesus! He then went on to study philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford. He really did walk the well-trodden path to being a Conservative frontbencher. After he graduated, he spent a couple of years as a management consultant, then jetted off to Japan to spend time as an English teacher. When he returned, he tried a number of different startups before co-founding a PR company named Profile PR. Once he sold up, he then founded a company called Hot Courses. Hot Courses proved to be a great financial success for Jeremy as he secured a rather large contract with the British Council. Fantastic news. Good on him for making a success of himself and not having to lean on his family. I mean, the vice chair of the British Council was, at that time, his cousin Virginia Bottomley, but I'm sure that was utterly coincidental and had absolutely no sway on the decision at all. As the famous saying goes, it's not who you know, it's what you know, or something. He would later step down as director in 2009, but still retained 48% of his shares. When the company was sold in 2017, he made over £14 million, making him the richest MP in Theresa May's cabinet. Hunt was first elected in 2005 to represent South West Surrey, curiously enough taking over from his cousin Virginia Bottomley, which I'm sure is absolutely fine and not fucking weird at all in any way. He was appointed as Shadow Minister for Disabled People after supporting David Cameron's bid for leadership, and when the cabinet was reshuffled in 2007, he became the Shadow Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. In September of 2010, while acting as the actual Secretary for Culture, Media and Sport, Jeremy did two things. Firstly, he proposed departmental cuts of between 35 and 50%. Secondly, he hired his former parliamentary assistant, Naomi Gummer, on a fixed-term civil service contract. Interestingly enough, Naomi is the daughter of Conservative peer Lord Chadlington, Jesus Christ, these names are ridiculous, who was a director of Jeremy's business Hot Courses between 2000 and 2004. It really is quite simple. We have too many people, and we need to slim down this operation pronto. Also, we don't have enough people here, so I need to hire this person who happens to be the daughter of a former business partner, a Conservative peer, a major donor to the party, and man who has been described as David Cameron's closest political ally. This is simply the exception that proves the rule that it's not who you know, it's what you know. Again, I'm sure I'm saying that right. In 2012, Jeremy was appointed as the Secretary of State for Health. If you've ever heard of him before, it's probably because during this time he was one of the most hated people in the country. Let's have a look at a few of the NHS statistics from before and after he took over, and perhaps by the end we can agree that calling him Jeremy Cunt for the rest of his life is totally justifiable. NHS rules state that 95% of patients visiting A&E should be seen within 4 hours. When Hunt took over, the NHS was at 94.9%. By the time he left, however, it was down to just 84%. The amount of patients waiting beyond 4 hours for emergency care had tripled. In light of his total failures, Hunt began toying with the idea of banning patients from attending A&E unless they had been referred by either a GP or 111. To be clear, Hunt's expert plan was to take the strain off frontline NHS services and move it to frontline NHS services. So, 111 will pick up the strain. Sure, I mean, routinely assessing whether or not somebody needs urgent medical attention without physically reviewing them first is a bit suboptimal, which, just so you know, is exactly why a medical professional will triage and assess your signs and symptoms when you arrive at A&E, regardless of who the fuck you spoke to beforehand. There have also been concerns raised by medical professionals that the 111 service is actually increasing the burden on A&E by referring inappropriate patients. But who really needs medical professionals when we've got Jez on the case? I think you're forgetting that he did philosophy at Oxford, so he's more than qualified to understand the intricacies of healthcare, unlike these so-called doctors with their experience and human emotion. The number of hospital beds dropped from 135,559 in the quarter that he took up office to 127,305 when he left. That's 8,200 beds less than when he started. This is bad because, and I'll preface this by saying that I didn't go to Oxford, the beds are where the sick people go. Speaking of beds, an occupancy rate of 85% is the maximum recommended level to maintain patient safety standards. In Q1 2018, under Jeremy Hunt, they reached 92.6%, the worst quarter ever recorded. But I suppose the 85% max is just a formality, really. It just means that there will be a lower risk of transmitting some flus and bugs. I'm sure there won't be any need to consider, say, an airborne pandemic in the near future. Furthermore, love using that word, the amount of urgent cancer cases being seen by specialists within 2 weeks had dropped from 95.4% when he took over to 91.9%. With those that exhibit breast symptoms, it's much the same story, falling from 95.7% to 88.4%. NHS targets put the amount of cancer patients beginning their treatment within 2 months of being referred by a GP at 85%. Jez took over at 87.3%, and by the time he left, it was at 78.3%. And it wasn't just cancer patients that fell victim to the Right Honourable Jeremy Hunt. Those needing hernia, hip, and knee operations weren't treated until they reported severe pain. Cataract operations and hearing aids were limited to just one eye or ear, because, Jeremy, I'm sure you'll agree, there's nothing worse than entitled paws thinking they have the right to 2 functioning fucking eyeballs. As a result of his obsession with delivering a 7-day NHS, which, as we all know, already existed and thus was a total and complete pile of cock, Hunt oversaw the first junior doctors' strike in 40 years. He also almost triggered the first nurses' strike in history, which was only avoided by promising a 3% pay rise that wasn't actually delivered as promised. The chief executive of NHS providers, Chris Hopson, described his plan as being impossible to deliver due to a lack of funding and staffing. In 2016, the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee said that the plan was completely uncosted, contained serious flaws, and that Jeremy had made no coherent attempt to understand staffing needs. Speaking of staffing needs, he said back in 2015 that he wanted 5,000 more GPs by 2020. Fantastic stuff. That experience as a management consultant is really starting to shine through. After a few days, he shifted the goalposts and said that there would have to be some flexibility to the commitment. When he left the department in 2018, there was an increase of just 162 GPs. I'm all for flexibility, lads, but that's like 96% more flexible than I'd have liked. Many people believe that the 7-day NHS pledge was actually nothing more than a way for the Tories to hand yet more control of the NHS over to private companies. While Jeremy claimed that this was not his plan, literally every decision he made until he left is evidence enough that he was, in fact, fibbing. Even back in 2005, in his first year as an MP, he co-wrote a pamphlet called Direct Democracy, an Agenda for a New Model Party. It advocated for denationalising the NHS and replacing it with health accounts that people would pay money into so they could shop around for the best care provider. While Hunt denied that the pamphlet expressed his own views, I think at this point you'd have to be some sort of thick arsehole to actually believe him. I bet you're thinking, but geez, surely our privately educated Oxford economics graduate would be able to secure the finances necessary to at least maintain the NHS, right? No, of course not, you fucking dweeb, read a book. Jeremy proved once again that he was as useful as balls on a dildo as he secured a historically low level of funding for the NHS during his time as Chief PH Dickhead. The increase to NHS funding had been a meagre 1% under Jeremy Hunt for the first couple of years, despite the Office for Budget Responsibility, the King's Fund, Health Foundation and Nuffield Trust recommending 4.3% to merely keep up with inflation. Apparently, Mr. Head Boy over here couldn't muster up enough fucking brain cells to understand that underfunding the NHS by over 75% of projected inflationary costs was about as viable as somebody ever uttering the sentence, Jeremy Hunt is actually a rather good guy. Despite getting his start as a management consultant, and despite the number one rule of being a manager is to own your shit, Jeremy consistently tried to cover up the many failures happening under his watch. In June 2017, he was summoned to the Commons to answer for covering up a damning report, finding that private contractors failed to process over 700,000 pieces of medical correspondence. It reportedly impacted the health of at least 1,700 patients and cost a minimum of £6.6 million. He also waited up to 4 months before admitting publicly that an error caused 450,000 women to fail to receive breast screening invitations. Hunt later admitted that 270 patients may have died as a result. Luckily for us, our government observed those 6 years of utter ineptitude and lack of direction and decided that Jeremy would no longer be involved in any key financial decisions, and he's Chancellor of the Exchequer. Brilliant. Fucking brilliant. As his relatively brief spell simping for Saudi Arabia as the Foreign Secretary ended, Jeremy returned to the backbenches. This looked like the perfect chance for him to regroup, keep his name off any worst politicians alive list, and get back to his roots as an MP. And so, he did. Jeremy founded Patient Safety Watch in October of 2019. It's a charity created to report on patient safety standards. You know, the thing he didn't care about at all for the 6 years he was actually in charge of this stuff. He must have really done a 180 on his passion for reporting information since 2015 when he covered up a report that was critical about his management of the NHS. What with it being just before the general election, that wouldn't have been good for his interests. Let's not even mention his covering up of the report from 2017 that we talked about earlier, because rehashing the fact that he has consistently covered up reports that specifically made his management of the NHS look bad is just petty, and I'm above all that. Not only is Jeremy Hunt a smelly poo-poo head, but it was later discovered that 66% of the income generated by Patient Safety Watch was paid to its chief executive and only employee, Adam Smith. If this name is at all familiar to you, it's because he was formerly an advisor to Jeremy back in 2012 when he was Culture Secretary. Smith resigned from that position after he was found to be exchanging messages with a lobbyist for Rupert Murdoch's News Corp during their takeover of B-Sky B. It turns out that cozying up with people that you're supposed to be impartial to is frowned upon by some sticklers for, like, the law, and honesty, and integrity and stuff. Luckily for us all, Jeremy was quick to forgive him for his accidental and definitely not intentional minor slip-up. So, we flash forward to 2022. Jeremy gets a call from esteemed Prime Minister we all know and love and remember, Liz Truss. She probably said something like, "Alright, Jezza, you absolute fucking slag. You blessed? Sick. Anyway, just hop on the old dog and bone to see if you fancy being Chancellor. Truth be told, Kwasi's gone and fucked it. £5 in the shitter, and we need somebody devoid of emotion who actually knows how to hold a calculator the fucking right way up. Jezza probably replied, "Yeah man, no dramas. I don't know if you saw my work on the NHS, but I'm pretty fucking good at not spending any money at all for anything, ever. Anyway, it's my day off, but I'm in Peckham throwing Fabergé eggs at poor people, so I'll be round in about half hour." And so, Jeremy Hunt became the Chancellor of the Exchequer. His first budget was presented in March this year, and yeah, I mean, it was a Conservative budget. He set aside £9 billion a year in tax reliefs for businesses to increase economic growth. He's freezing fuel duty when, frankly, that's the least the government could do given that taxation accounts for almost half the price of fuel nowadays anyway, thieving bastards. The energy price guarantee was held at £2,500, so that's neat. He also started work on getting 30 hours a week of free childcare for working parents. It may surprise you to hear me say this, but he actually did what he was supposed to do. I ain't mad at it. These are good things that will help working class people, but it's simply not enough. And people know it. When he stands up at a Conservative Party conference and says that it's unfair that someone who refuses to look for work gets the same as someone trying their best, he isn't talking about giving working people more for their hard work. He's talking about yet more cuts to people who claim benefits. When he says that a Labour government will lead to higher taxes, he's probably right. But higher taxes for who? The rich, that's who. The people on the profitable end of the largest transfer of wealth in British history. Now, if the problem is that wealth is being disproportionately handed off to the top 1% and being held offshore, then you aren't going to tackle that problem by tightening the work capability assessment. You're totally missing the main problem that impacts working people the most, while also compounding the ill health of the poorest amongst us. Now, my point is that Hunt is exactly the same man as he was before. He isn't freezing taxes and fuel duties and energy prices because he's really invested in the quality of life for you and your family. He's doing it because the time has come for another general election, and he needs to be able to say that he's done something to help the voters. He's doing it because the mandate from Rishi Sunak is simple. Throw them a bone so we can shout about something, anything at all, at the general election. The recent results in Tamworth and Mid-Bedfordshire show exactly how much trouble the Tories are in, and they absolutely will try and hustle you into thinking that they really, really do care about your family and your children. Don't believe them. The fact that Jeremy looks comparatively less mental than the rest of the current Conservative government isn't a testament to his sanity as much as it is a testimony to how mental the rest of these fucking gremlins are. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please do like and subscribe, it really helps. A big thank you to my gorgeous and sexy supporters on Patreon. Marie, Jeffrey Anderson, Fluffy the Demon, Destroyer of Worlds, Nice, Alex Davies, Craig Hall, Simon Watton, Matthew Gray, Lord Kittycat, Rory McElhone, Alexis Geddes, Paul Ashworth, Alex Ray, Clodagh Martin, Jacqueline Cowan, Shuttermask, Graham Cox, Birgit, Dom Fay Leith, Mixed Methods, Yusuf Jedi, Grizzman, Maggie Leake, Simon Crowther, Adam Clarkson, Sugar Mouse, Rob McNamara, Andrew Jackson, and Benjamin Grease. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so from just £1 a month. The link is in the description. Love you. Bye bye.